I am Marcia Barnhart, and what I'm going to be talking to you about today is your high quality professional development plan. That will be a part of the grant that you write. The grant application requires a professional development plan. Primarily, we're going to spend this hour and a half talking about three broad topics. One, how does PD change educator practice? And does it work? Then we're going to look at two documents that really give us some guidance on what high quality PD should look like. One is the Ohio Standards for Professional Development, and the second document is, it's not really a document, but it's the criterion that ESSA has given us for what high quality PD should look like. How many of you have ever heard of your local literacy plan? In the past, legally, certain school districts have been required to complete a reading achievement plan. And there was criteria for that. If you have a D or an F on the literacy component, or if you have a certain percentage of students who, are below grade level reading, you have to submit a reading achievement plan. Can I see hands of anybody who's had to, any district organization that's had to complete one? All right, so we have a few. Notice the new name, Local Literacy Plan. It's not a RAP anymore. It was a RAP for those students reading achievement plan who had to complete it based on law, but for this grant, it's called a Local Literacy Plan. And that's kind of the difference. And the Local Literacy Plan has 8 components, and you will be required to complete this if you want to apply for the grant. The first section of the Local Literacy Plan addresses your leadership team. So first of all, you're going to have to list who is your leadership team, what development process you use to pull that leadership team together, and just document that team. And the second part, you will show how your local literacy plan is aligned to the state literacy plan and to the district efforts of school improvement. So your school district probably has a school improvement plan. How does this local literacy plan align to that? There should be some alignment going on, and you'll have to write that into the second part. The third part is where you show your needs assessment. You've collected data, and you can show that there's a need for literacy work in your district or organization. Fourth, you'll tell us what your literacy mission is and what your vision is. Section 5 will be where you create goals based on that data you collected. 6, you will complete some action planning maps to show how you're going to go about achieving those goals. 7, you will talk about your monitoring the progress of the grant, or the plan actually. And then 8 is where you talk about expectations, supports for learners and professionals. Guess where PD fits in on that plan? Take a look at those 8. Where's your PD going to fit in? Well, there's definitely PD going in on all of it. There's actually a place in section 8 for you to list and spell out your PD plan on a template, all right? So section 8 has 3 parts. One where you're telling the evidence-based practices and interventions you're using. B, where you're talking about your monitoring and your feedback loops. And C, there it is, finally. We get to the very last component of the local literacy plan. That's where this professional development plan will be spelled out. And what we found out in the past is that through the RAPs that have been submitted to ODE in the past, this is the weakest element. When they read through the plans, the professional development plan comes up the weakest every time. So hopefully with some of the information I give you today, when you write your plan, it will be stronger and it'll put you in a greater position for increased chance of getting the grant. So let's pick your brain a little bit for PD that you have experienced. But what I'd like you to do is reflect back on a time that you had an experience of really high quality PD. You left, you wanted to go right out there and activate whatever it is that you learned. Now think about what about that experience made it so effective. What adjectives would you use to describe those PD experiences that really had impact? Because that's what ESSA has given us, adjectives to describe it. And let's just see how their adjectives match up with ours. Okay, let's hear a few of those words shouted out. Give me a word.
Interactive.
Interactive, excellent. Engaging. Inspiring. Attainable. Good. Social. Creative. Motivating. Relevant. Consistent. Truth. True. Responsive. Ongoing. Modeled. Results driven. Okay. Differentiated. Job embedded. You know, whenever you do anything with your staff or with any group, I think even with students, teachers should do this. You should always start with the what. Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Establishing the relevancy. Always go back to that. Why do we do professional development? Well, we talked a little bit about this before, but according to Gusky, and I love this article by him that I'm using throughout the presentation, he says professional development programs are systematic efforts to bring about change in classroom practices of teachers, in their attitudes and beliefs, and in the learning outcomes of students. How do you like that? Does that capture it all? I think it really does too, because it's systematic, that's a key part, and it's about change, adult behavior change, but hoping that that adult behavior change will lead to what? A change in student outcomes. So I think it really captures the key components of effective PD. But here's a really, really stinky little piece of it that's really hard to deal with, the attitudes and beliefs. Changing a person's attitudes and beliefs. Ooh, that is sticky wicky, isn't it? So we have to really think about that deeply, that it's not just about throwing something out there and expecting them to go run down the hall and do it. We've got to be engaged in some kind of attitudinal change as well. PD often fails. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. Yes. And oftentimes it fails because we fail to consider these two pieces, according to Gusky. He says we often fail to figure out or consider what motivates teachers to change, basically. What motivates them to change? What do you think motivates teachers to change? Okay, so they need to see some benefit for themselves, and they're hoping to see a benefit for their students. Okay.
Then you've got them hooked.
So you've got this attitude piece. I'd like you to think about for a minute what comes first. Changing their attitude or belief, then their practice, or changing their practice first, and then changing their attitudes and beliefs. But do you think we often plan PD with the opposite in mind? Mm-hmm. That we're going to change their attitude by sitting in this PD session, we're changing their attitudes because we're showing them all this research. And we're showing them this data. And then they'll go change their practice. So that's a little dilemma I'd like you to think about, which goes first and which goes second. I'm going to show you what Gusky has found in his research. But the second reason that PD often fails is because the process by which teachers change is not really a part of the planning. Thinking that through. How will we work this change process with them? And they often fail because of that. Let's talk about the first one. What motivates teachers to change? We've already talked about it. They want to improve. They want to be better teachers. They want to improve student outcomes. They like the feeling of increased competence. They get greater professional satisfaction. And then there's that thing called OTES, right? That has become something that figures into the equation. And by the way, the last year and a half I worked in the Office of Educator Effectiveness, I was basically in charge of principal evaluation before I came over to the literacy office. So it's very interesting for me to get into that, really deeply into that teacher evaluation and principal evaluation and see how it really does impact the teachers. For the right reasons or not so sure. So here's the common belief. Actually, we've thought for many, many years that teachers sit in a PD, we are just planning to change their beliefs and their attitudes. They're going to run down the hall, change their practices, student outcomes will occur. That is kind of the old paradigm of what we used to think PD was all about. But Guskey shows in his research that really it happens this way. And some of you hit on it. You hit on it right on the head because you've seen it happen. They do not believe anything unless they've actually put it in practice and seen the results. So what are the implications of this for us as PD planners? Yes, so you have to give them time to put it into practice before they are actually going to change their beliefs. What else? So that they want to try it because they want to please you and they want to do the right thing and they want student improvement. So that's part of that, definitely. Anything else you're thinking of? So that whole culture issue plays a big part of it, yes. There's some new research out on growth mindset. I don't know if I'm not going to go there, but it's very interesting that it's probably very misunderstood the way people are using it right now. I don't know if any of you have seen that article, but it's real interesting. You might want to pursue that. Okay, what else? How do we get the teachers to try it? So start small, model it so that they know how to do it. Well, I have included all the information about this article that Guskey has written, and it's at the end of the PowerPoint, so you have the reference if you'd like to look it up. So here's what he says are the implications. Basically, he says, knowing this new model, here's what we need to remember. Recognize that change is gradual and a difficult process. Someone already said that, didn't you? It's slow. It takes time. You just can't expect to see it overnight. Make sure the educators are getting feedback as you expect them to make this change. And the feedback needs to be on what are the students doing as a result of this changed adult behavior. Focus in on what those students are doing. Are they improving? And then I like this one. I think it's very interesting. Obviously, we provide support, ongoing and continual, and I heard that as some of the adjectives used this morning. But what about this pressure piece? This is where administrators walk a very fine line, isn't it? They have to be instructional leaders and bring the good, but they also have to nudge the teachers and the educators. And really, superintendents have to do this with their administrators. And that's what I've done for the past year and a half is write professional development for principals. And the principal evaluation, the superintendent does the principal evaluation, and is the superintendent nudging the principal as an instructional leader too. So we've got that going on too. Anyone want to comment on the pressure? Lift, push and lift. I like that. Give them that little lift. The support and also the push. Let's move on to our second segment. This is all about teachers changing. Remember, we were going to hit that first. Now we'll move into the standards for professional development that Ohio has and the ESSA piece to tell us what we should be doing with PD. How many of you knew that Ohio has standards for professional development? How many of you have read those standards? And then how about the ESSA? Has anyone looked at what ESSA has to say about PD? Yeah, okay, so we know this is a federal grant that we're applying for, and so we are going to require a greater alignment with your PD plan with ESSA. So ESSA needs to really be your guide. We have to show the federal government that what we are producing aligns to ESSA. However, we do not want to skip the Ohio standards for professional development. So we'll start there. Once again, this word comes up that what a PD should be a part of a system. A systematic approach, not just, okay, the teachers are off, let's throw something at them. It has to be a systematic plan. It should be a set of clear expectations, and it should guide efforts in selecting PD. And this is all the Ohio standards. You'll see all the guidance for that in the Ohio standards. Who were the professional development standards written for? All of these people. We think of it as like leaders of PD, but really those standards were written for all of these groups. How could a local professional development committee use the professional development standards? Okay, help create those plans for people? Absolutely. Evaluate that PD that they submit for their hours to see if it truly measures up to high quality. So here are the 7 key areas of the standards for Ohio standards. We have a standard on learning communities, one on leadership, resources, data, learning designs, implementation, and outcomes. There's a lot of language in those standards, but basically it all boils down to those topics. So what we're going to do is on your device now, look up the professional development standards. If you'll go to the ODE website, once you get there, in the search box, you'll enter professional development standards. They were actually created in 2005 and they were updated in 2014. Any other dates other than that are just maybe a little typo arrows they corrected or something like that. So at your table, I would like you to assign a standard or 2 standards, depending on how many people you have there. There's 7 standards. Divide them up among yourselves. Study your standard, and you're going to teach it to your table. Okay. Thank you for engaging in that little reading assignment, which turned into a reading, speaking, listening, and for some, a writing assignment. All right, literacy at its best. Were any of the words that you use to describe your standard words that we talked about before? Are adjectives. Give me a couple. Engaging. Collaborative. Any others? There's a big one that starts with a D, although we didn't really use the word D. The data-driven, and we talked about outcomes-driven, but the data definitely is a part of it. So did you know that Ohio Department of Education has a learning management system? Did you know that? Good. So on the learning management system is a course about the PD standards, actually. So if you would like any of your district people to know more about the standards for professional development, there's a course there. It's called Ohio Standards for Professional Development. And yours truly created it. So I'm, of course, going to advertise it. So how does ESSA define professional development? Let's move into that third block. Here is the definition from ESSA. Here are the adjectives, actually. There's a big, long, wordy definition, but we're going to focus on these adjectives. Sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom-focused. If there's one of those words that you think you're really not sure what they mean by it, which word would it be? Which one of those adjectives? Job-embedded, okay. That might be the trickier one. That's why when someone brought it up earlier today, and they said job-embedded, and I said, what does that really mean? That is the word that threw me. Intensive, what really did they mean by that? And actually, ESSA did not give us any definitions of these words. They gave us just the words. And so several different companies have, and research groups have tried to really focus in on what these 6 words really mean when applied to professional development. And there they are. Nice big 6 blocks. But we are going to be looking at this report, and I highly recommend anyone working on the professional development plan access these reports because they actually have written reports on those words. Frontline Research and Learning Institute, the report is called Bridging the Gap. But if you Google it, make sure you put Frontline beside it, because if you just put Bridging the Gap, you'll get all kinds of crazy things. So Bridging the Gap, Frontline is, I'm taking the information as we move forward from that, from their resources, so you know. What Frontline Research Group did is they took 27 states, 203 schools, 376 PD activities, and 3,227,000 enrollments in PD and studied them. So they have collected a lot of data on 3,227,000 enrollments and come up with this report. And basically the overall finding is this. Most of it doesn't measure up to ESSA's definition. So if we go back to those 6 big blocks of words, which one do you think your district is the weakest based on what you know so far? Of course, you don't know what intensive means, so you can't really figure that out. But where do you think your district needs the most improvement before we even talk about each one of those words? Sustained.
What's the word?
I feel like that you're getting at that whole differentiation piece too, which is especially the higher the grade level it is, they really want it to apply to them. For 2 years, I did independent consulting after I left the department and traveled all over Ohio and did PD on the Common Core State Standards for ELA, because that was my specialty. And I would go into PD sessions and I would have the music teacher and the other teachers in the room, and they would just be PO'd. You know, they just, even though ELA has literacy standards across the content areas, they were still very angry at having to be there. So I think that differentiation piece is truly difficult. And notice they don't really call it out here. ESSA doesn't truly call it out. Now, I think it would be embedded in one of these, and we can talk about which one we think that differentiation piece fits in. But I can tell you, it's really not about intensive. The sustaining piece.
Yeah, being able to sustain it.
And I will tell you that the sustained and the intensive work very close together. Once we get into that, you'll see the connection. But the roadblocks that you're talking about, regardless of the district, I think you all can relate to. Mm-hmm. Definitely roadblocks. It is a hard job and it's a huge challenge. Let's start looking at each one of these words and find out what Frontline discovered in their research and how they define each one of these words. So sustained means taking place over an extended period of time, longer than 1 day or one-time workshop. All right, obviously, that's not too hard to figure out. But in their research, they found that 80% of professional development enrollments over a 5-year period were not sustained. So that's a pretty big percentage, and that 13% of the activities, only 13% included more than 3 meetings. And you'll see that when we get to the metric on how they measured it, 1 hour is definitely not what they can, anything more than an hour is definitely not what they actually call high quality either. It's a different threshold for what high quality is. They just did a measurement to see on one day or one shot, and making it very simple to understand because they feel that most PD is a 1 day, one shot kind of thing. And so just a bottom line, it should not be that. I mean, that's the bottom. That's the bottom of the line. So you disagree with that definition, and I can totally understand that. Look at the 3 modes of delivering PD. Sometimes you'll have an expert with a big group. Sometimes you'll have an expert working with an individual. That'd be more like coaching. And sometimes you'll have peer-to-peer where the teachers are working together, co-observing and that sort of thing. And so you see down at the bottom all those different types of PD you might be offering. And so that's what they were looking at when they did the study in terms of defining it. Now here's the metric for each one of those groups. How do you measure it to see if it really counts as sustained? Well, it has to do with the number of meetings for a course or a topic, for the expert to group, and a different metric for that mode of expert to individual and a different one from peer to peer. And that's the way they measured it. How many times? So for sustained, it's about how many times they're meeting on that particular topic. Bottom line, here's the way Frontline has defined it. If it's 3 times or fewer, it's not sustained. And it should be 4, 5, or more, up to 12, depending on the context of your school, your skills that you're trying to teach. I mean, it's all very contextual. You can't just set a number and say, okay, we have to have this many every year. I mean, that's just not realistic because that doesn't allow for the differentiation.
For an implementation period.
A year. This would be a year. Exactly.
So it's not,
But does the district have structures, supports, and mechanisms in place to look at, are you even thinking about measuring how many times PD is happening? And when we get to the intensive part, I think this will all make a little bit more sense because that's where the rubber meets the road. So definitely this is not a science that we can say, oh, we're going to check your plan to see if you have 3 times or 4 times. You know what I'm saying? But as you write that PD plan, think about this whole piece of showing how you plan for sustaining the PD that you are offering in some way. Address it in your writing of the grant, okay? It's a key. So let's talk about intensive. What does this intensive mean? So intensive means that the PD is focused on a discrete concept, practice, or program. Well, that word discrete, what does that mean? It all hinges on that word discrete, doesn't it? What does discrete mean? Discrete means small. Small. Isolated. So here's an example. Let's say that you think your teachers need professional development on critical thinking, helping the kids learn how to do critical thinking. So you have someone come in and do a training on their PD day, critical thinking. So they're PD'd now, aren't they? No, clearly. One session is not going to work because we know that metric is not appropriate. How could you make the session intensive? How could you make the whole concept of critical thinking an intensive PD? Instead of saying, we're only going to meet once, well, clearly we're going to meet more than once on this whole critical thinking. But how would you break that into discrete concepts? Critical thinking as a big topic. So you're going to focus on how critical thinking can be divided into skills, right? Each discrete skill that supports critical thinking. And then you'll take one of those at a time and you'll go deep on it. You'll spend a lot of time on it versus one workshop doing critical thinking. Here's a bunch of activities. So what might be a discrete skill of teaching critical thinking?
Analyzing the text.
Okay, maybe analyzing the text, a discrete skill, yeah. Or, let me see, I have some notes, hold on, I forgot. How about problem solving? So today we're just going to do problem solving, and maybe for 3 months we're going to focus on problem solving, that discrete skill. We're going to go deep into it rather than surface. What they found out is the average professional learning was 4.5 hours in duration on any topic. That's what these schools were getting. This is this concept, isn't it? Teaching a mile wide and an inch deep. So how many initiatives are going on in the district? And how deep are we actually going on any of them? That's not intensive. Do you see the difference? We want it to go an inch wide and a mile deep. That's intensive. All right, so when you are writing that professional development plan, how can you show that you're segmenting your professional development in such a way that those teachers are learning the discrete skills deeply? You're going to sustain it for sure, aren't you? And you're going to break down that PD into smaller chunks. You know how we've taught in literacy, chunk the text? So we're going to chunk the PD and go deeper on it. Any thoughts on that idea?
Chunk, that's
Could guided reading be
broken
chunked
down
even more? If it can, then keep doing it until you've got to something where you know, oh, I'm going to teach this deeply. So I see this initiative overload in districts where they're just going an inch deep on everything because they hear that that's what they need to be doing, and I feel so bad for them because it's true, they do need to be doing all these things. You know, they need to be doing social emotional learning, they need to be doing critical thinking, they need to be doing all these things. But it's just like our teachers, social studies teachers, I want to say this theory too. You know, I don't care how many dates you have them memorized and give them all that information. If you're just doing this surface skim through, but I got to cover it, kids aren't learning anything. Got to take it, break it down. So the word that comes to my mind is prioritize. Prioritize. Honestly, if you do the teaching deeply, they'll do fine on the state tests. If the teachers are teaching content deeply, as you're delivering PD deeply, they'll do fine on that state test. Well, we hope these states will get on board with ESSA. Just making fun of myself, actually. No, this is what's being pushed as kind of the new frontier, and hopefully everybody's going to start listening to this because there is an issue with this, and we recognize that. I don't have any answers for you in prioritizing. It's just a paradigm shift. We have to start thinking more like that. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not. It's just not easy. But it all comes down to prioritizing and having a district plan, and you've all agreed that these are our priorities. Now, quite frankly, I think literacy should be your district priority. So, I mean, that's a big thing, though. It would have to really be chunked down. So how do they measure it? How did Frontline measure it? So the intensive metric for that is the length of hours spent on, and look at the bold words, one competency, one topic, one standard. How much time are you spending on that discrete piece, going deeply? So how much time is enough? Check that out. That's what they found in the research. 49 hours. How many of you have heard that? I think is it Outliers where he talks about it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything, which is not what we're expecting here, but certainly the current findings, think about that in relationship to that we're spending 4.25 hours on those competencies right now. So what's our big takeaway? Anything less than 14 hours does not yield significant results on student outcomes, is what they found in their research. And, you know, we don't want to say this is hard science, but isn't it nice to have some kind of a target range? To say, all right, we're going to work on increasing the length we spend on these so that we have a target range. We know that 4 hours is not enough, so let's increase gradually. I mean, this is not an exact science, but it's a different way of thinking about it. And how many hours are you spending on competencies? There's not enough time, right? This is what we're all talking about, to go deeply on everything. We understand these challenges. And there's an enormous gap between everything that needs to be covered and the amount of time. Understood, but we just have to move in that direction. So here's a school district, the Pitt County Schools. They used them in the study to show as an exemplar, with the national averages being in the center column for how much time was being spent on discrete skills and competencies. And Pitt County made a promise that they were going to increase the number of hours they spent on their PD competencies. And so that's just a little chart to show you what they did. That means they spent on an average in that year 10 hours of PD on each competency that they're trying to get across.
And how many competencies?
Well, that's the district. That's up to the district. Yeah. This is just about measuring the amount of time, the hours they spent on a topic or a competency, a discrete competency. This was an average.
Yeah.
This is an average. All right, let's talk about my favorite one, collaborative. Very easy to understand. We all do that anyway, right? We all do collaborative PD. Well, actually, it's a little misunderstood. The definition involving multiple educators, coaches, participants, that verb that I love, grappling. Grappling with the same concept or practice, and they work together to achieve, and here's my other favorite word, shared understanding. So grappling with a concept, an intensive concept, and coming away from it with a shared understanding. And 9% of activities actually meet that. Doesn't just mean we're getting in a room talking about it. It has to be bigger than that. It has to be much more than that. So anyway, I've got some questions in terms of what it means to look at PD and make sure that you're working toward a collaborative type of PD. What does this look like to you, these questions? When you're designing your PD, you should be asking yourself these, yes, what does it look like? It looks like OTES to me, a lesson plan. Let's start thinking about our PD experiences the same way we expect teachers to think about their lesson plans. So when they walk out of that PD, how do we know if they have a shared understanding? We don't know most of the time. You should be. Yes, you should be. You should be assessing them just the way teachers assess students to find out if they met the objective. So here's some PD questions that you will ask about how are we going to think about them working together? What does it mean what kind of learning process leads to the outcome? What's a learning process? You're planning your PD. What kind of learning process? Doesn't that kind of go back to the mode? Like, how are you going to set it up? What's the learning process for this group so that they're going to get the most out of it? And then we have a set of questions for the people themselves. Who are the participants? What's their background knowledge? This is just like teaching a lesson, isn't it? So this is another way we have to start thinking about it. The key ingredient is this word reciprocity. So members of your PD are not just passive recipients. They are teaching and learning with each other. It's a mutual exchange for it to be collaborative. Doesn't just mean group work though. The best video in the world, right here, but be sure and watch it. It shows a group of math teachers doing what I call the most high quality collaborative PD I've ever seen. You'll have the PowerPoint, so just be sure and access it. Sorry.
Like a TBT format?
Yes, it's wonderful. And to show your staff what this should look like. This is an example of what it should be happening in the TBTs. Job-embedded. Does that help clarify? I think that's kind of what we thought it would be. You know, it has to be what's going on in the classroom. In other words, if you have collect data and you see that the students are struggling with a certain skill because the teachers are having trouble teaching that skill, you're going to make what's happening in the job, in the setting of the school, the focus of your PD, not just some random thing you pulled in. And the people in the building are doing it. You calling in those experts, that's okay every now and then, but you have amazing experts in your staff, on your teams. What are they finding? What are they trying? Sharing with the staff that. Look what gets the most green lights on those types of PD for job-embeddedness. Which one gets the most? Lesson study has the most green. What is lesson study? That video is lesson study, where they sit and talk about what they want to try together, a group of teachers. They observe each other. They come back together. They discuss it. What worked, what didn't work. They go back and try. They come back together. That's lesson study. All right, let's do data-driven, easy one, right? We know what that means. We need to make sure the PD that we choose is based on data that we've collected, that there's a needs assessment. 8% of the activities met that criteria. Here are some data sources that you might consider for PD on the left. When you get back to this PowerPoint, spend some time looking at those data sources as ways to inform your PD. Some essential questions for data-driven. To what extent are professional learning activities that teachers participating in meeting their own needs and the needs of their students? Always has to go back to that. What are their needs, the needs of their students? And how are you using that data to inform? Classroom focused, last but not least, related to the practices that are taking place in the classroom. Now, quite frankly, I have some trouble between job-embedded and classroom focused as overlapping. You know, it all has to be something that's happening in the building, the needs of the building, teaching process. Don't you have this conflict between, should we go deeper into pedagogy or deeper into content in terms of training the teachers? Where should we, you know, it's a tension. And so you have to really look at your data to find out which one needs to be driving it. 85% of the enrollments, this is the strongest criterion that they found in their study, that it meets classroom focused most all the time, the PD that's happening. So here's a cycle for you to consider as you plan your PD. I'm going to talk about the principal in this has a huge role because we talked about this before, the tension of being the instructional leader and the evaluator. So hard. Give them a break, you guys. It's hard, you teachers, you know, but here are some things. You see our 6 criteria over here? Here are things principal can do to reach those as an instructional leader and as an evaluator. But here's what I really need you to focus on before you leave today. This is the template that you will be completing for your PD plan. All right? And notice that at the top, you're writing a goal for your PD plan. Where do you think that goal comes from? This actually is your literacy plan PD. All right? So it comes from, like, yes, the number 3. Remember when you assess the needs in number 3 of your literacy plan? Assess the needs, you write your goals. That's where you put your goal for your PD plan. You describe your activity, resources, and how you're going to evaluate it. But look what we sneaked in this year. What's different about this PD plan? All the ESSA words are right there. So is every activity going to check all of those boxes? No. Absolutely not. But check when it applies. When you write down your PD activities, check when it applies. This is part of your local literacy plan. Remember I showed you the 8 components at the beginning?
Right. But
This is 8C. The reading achievement plan is what by law certain districts had to do before, and they had to put in a PD plan.
Okay, so this is
But this is new. This is a new form of it.
So do you have to do a reading achievement plan?
Oh,
if you
I
are
guess
applying
I
for
should have
this?
said that, shouldn't I? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Yes, you have to submit a local literacy plan as part of your grant application. It's the core of your grant. It really is. We are going to look at that as the core of your grant writing.
This is in addition to that.
This is 8C of your local plan.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
what
It's called the local it's called the local literacy plan for the grant people.
Right, so it really
If you already have a reading achievement plan that you submitted this year on December 31st, you can use that. You can still use that. And we encourage you after today's sessions to change it up and to resubmit it with your grant based on that. Now wait, you can resubmit it with your grant, yes. And I think that is such a crucial piece to spread. And then here's the second page of your PD plan. Show how you've met those 6 criteria. You are going to tell in this block, the top one, how you have shown in your plan that you have sustained PD. Just a big picture. We hit the mark on sustained because we're doing these things. We hit the mark on collaborative because we're doing these things. All right? It's a 2-page professional development plan. What I was going to have you to do, and I have the handouts for you if you would like to take it back to your district, is to evaluate the PD that's happened in your building, list the activity or your district, and rate yourself on those adjectives, those words. It's an audit, sort of what you've already done. It's a great discussion starter for a group that's planning PD. When the RFA gets posted, it will be in the RFA. The local literacy plan template is there. Does it have the PD plan in it? Go all the way to the end of it.
Section 8, Part C, but it does not have
The template.
the template.
Yeah, the template will be in the RFA when it comes out.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, everybody. Good luck. I hope I've given you some new information on PD.